Всъщност наистина indeed, I'm very thankful for the introduction. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm switching to English as we're already recording. Well, yes, indeed, it is a great pleasure for me to be here today, and I had the opportunity to attend this lecture that was mentioned about bathing in late antiquity. So yes, indeed, we are going to develop much more on the topic today, but especially when we concentrate on the use of mineral water. And unlike in Bulgarian, this has a very nice term in English, which is thermalism. And today I'm going to talk about it, which is and thermalism, which is the use of hot mineral water for healing. And today I'm going to concentrate on Roman Thrace. The research I'm conducting concentrates on the period from AD 46 to 395, from the creation of the province of Thrace up until the establishment of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. However, a significant part of the evidence I'm going to discuss is of uncertain or rather broad chronology. This makes it difficult to establish beyond any doubt the material that originates only from late antiquity. So I'm going to present my research for the entire period and emphasize the evidence that is probably or undoubtedly related to late antiquity. Because of the significant scope of the research and limited time of this presentation, I'll concentrate on a few main points and mention others only in passing. However, if there is any aspect which you would like me to talk about further or which raises your questions, I will significantly appreciate your comments in the discussion. Thermalism, as mentioned earlier, is understood as the use of hot mineral water for healing purposes and not heated water in general. I want to underline that this research is interested only in water with mineral properties. Mineral water sources were a fascinating subject for the ancients, and many Roman authors theorized on the nature of springs, their properties, or the reasons behind the temperature and taste of the water. Vitruvius, the famous architect, for example, explains that the water is by nature cold, but becomes heated when it comes into contact with certain minerals, for example, sulfur, alum, or bitumen, and thanks to them gains healing qualities. Bathing in mineral water for healing purposes by the Romans also had an important religious aspect and was accompanied by the deposition of ex-votos. They could be deposited in various places, the most common of which include the spring itself, in close proximity to it, in or around the mineral lake formed around the spring or by the spring, and so on. It is those votive gifts that are the most common indicator of the use of the springs in Roman times. Therefore, the sites considered in the study match both of those criteria, that is, a mineral spring and the presence of votive offerings. Here on this slide, you can see a fragment of Tabula Peutingeriana, and especially the part which shows what is today the Black Sea coast. And here we see Aquae Calide, which is today's Burgaski Mineralni Bani. Aquae Calide, or Aquae together with another term, is a very common name for spa sites, let's call them. Because aqua is always in plural, it means water sources, because usually mineral water sources are not separate. They usually come in groups. It's a geological phenomenon. So also, if you look close, you can see that here you have a building with a pool with water inside it. On the other picture, you can see the Great Pool at Bath in England, which is Roman Aquae Sulis, also used by the Romans and also probably even before that. Thermalism, as mentioned earlier, is understood as the use of hot mineral water for healing purposes and not heated water in general. So, no, I said this already. The use of mineral water for healing, either through drinking or bathing, was well known to the Romans and widely practiced throughout the Roman Empire, both in Italy and the other territories of the empire. Apart from publications on particular sites, the phenomenon was a subject of study for many years in some of the provinces or regions in the empire. Amongst the most important works are the published PhD dissertation of Tana Joy Allen, entitled Roman Healing Spas in Italy, a study in design and function, as well as the publication of Este Dvoretsky on spa culture and medicine in the Eastern Mediterranean. Of particular interest is the research on Roman spas in Italy, conducted at the University of Padua in the 2010s. The interdisciplinary team studied various aspects of those sites, from their architectural appearance to their sacred and human aspect. The outcome of the research is published in a series of conference proceedings. Furthermore, at least 2 PhD dissertations on thermalism in the Western provinces of the empire were written as part of the project. In the last decade, several spas in the Western provinces were excavated, for example, Chaves, which is ancient Aqua Flavia in Portugal, and Baden, which is ancient Aqua Helvetica in Switzerland, to name only a few. The discovered archaeological remains provide valuable new information on the functioning of those sites and have reawakened the interest in the topic. When talking about Bulgarian thermal settlements, we need to mention the publications of several excavated sites, for example, Diocletianopolis, Haskoski Mineralni Bani, etc. Yet only a few attempts were made to explore thermalism as a phenomenon on a larger scale than that of a particular site. Some attempts were made in the 1930s and 1940s, however, they are by now increasingly outdated. One of the main problems encountered during the research are the mineral springs themselves. More precisely, they are notorious for their instability. Sources could dry up or form as a result of geological processes, for example, earthquakes. We know for a fact that earthquakes since the beginning of the 20th century, a period which is quite well documented, have caused a change in the discharge of many mineral springs in Bulgaria, as well as the appearance of new ones. This means that some of the thermal sources used in for bathing in antiquity may not exist anymore, making them unavailable for study and extremely difficult for detection. Furthermore, as a result of geological processes, the water could change its temperature and properties. This is also observed after the building of a catchment installation. Another problem stems from the fact that springs can be clogged with silt or sand over time, which decreases their flow rate. In order to restore the discharge, the source had to be cleaned, often removing a significant amount of archaeological material. Thus, in some cases, lack of votives or any remains in the spring and around it does not necessarily mean that the site was not used in the Roman period. So now I would like to say a few words about thermalism as a healing method. Before presenting particular sites, I would like to outline some basic concepts. Bathing was a practice used in rational Greek medicine as early as the Hippocratic corpus. It was applied as a therapeutic or preventive procedure. However, discerning a particular pattern as to the curative properties in the available prescriptions is now impossible, because the prescriptions from different works in the corpus contradict each other. One thing that can be assumed as sure, though, is that whether the water was mineral or not was not of particular importance. This trend also continues in later medical writings. In the 2nd century BC, Greek medicine was popularized in Rome by Asclepiades of Bithynia. Though none of his works survives, later sources underline the importance of bathing in his medical concept. However, there is no information to suggest that he prescribed the use of mineral water. Probably the first medical recommendation of bathing in mineral water comes from the works of Scribonius Largus, who was the court physician of Emperor Claudius. Interestingly, he mentions bathing in thermal springs with a low concentration of iron, situated in Etruria, as beneficial to bladder and kidney diseases. Later, in the 2nd century AD, Galen makes only a few mentions of the effect of mineral water on health, most notably in hygiene. He relates the case of a patient who bathed in a sulfur spring at Aqua Albula, a famous Roman spa near Tivoli. The patient subsequently developed fever, which Galen blames on the waters. In the same work, the physician claims that especially mineral water with high amounts of sulfur is harmful. From what was said so far, it is clear that bathing in mineral water was not common practice in rational medicine. However, we should bear in mind that rational medicine was limited to those who could afford it, and there were a plethora of healing practices available to the local population. They're comprised of cures known for ages and passed from one generation to the other. We catch a glimpse of those in Pliny the Elder's Natural History, an encyclopedic work written in the 1st century AD. He makes a clear differentiation when talking about bathing in thermal springs. Pliny's recommendations are usually associated with the use of drugs before, after, or while being in the bath. So it seems that bathing is applied in order to enhance the properties of the drug and not as the primary healing method. Historical sources from the Roman period contain much information on the use of mineral springs, especially in Italy. For example, multiple authors write about the enormous popularity of the healing waters at Baia or Acqua Albola. The status of thermalism is also supported by epigraphic evidence. The wide use of mineral water in popular medicine, as opposed to the few preserved recommendations of it in rational medicine, clearly show that this healing method was much more common than medical texts suggest. Therefore, establishing the true extent of the popularity of thermalism rests with archaeological research. Nevertheless, what evidence may we expect to find? First of all, we can expect remains of bathing facilities, either entire bath complexes or separate pools. Such examples from Thrace include Diocletianopolis, Pautalia, Aquae Calide, and Pancharevo, as well as many others. In Italy, the first thermal establishments started functioning around the 3rd century BC, and archaeological structures related to bathing emerged only in the 2nd century BC, that is, 1 century later. Along with the expansion of Roman power in Europe, thermal establishments emerged throughout the empire. It is no surprise that they varied in size, date, the used building materials, etc. Fikretigo discerns 3 or 4 stages in the development of thermal sites based on the change of their architectural features. The first and most simple one is when a natural open-air communal pool is used. At this stage, there is little infrastructure related to the spring. This makes such sites difficult to distinguish archaeologically. The second phase in the involvement of a spa is when an enclosed pool hall is built, in which the pool takes almost the entire space of the floor. The building is not equipped with a hypocaust or any type of heating system, relying on the natural temperature of the water. The pool hall is the main element of the spa at this stage. However, it is possible that few halls appear together, or that additional rooms or buildings were added to form a complex. The last stage is when alongside an unheated pool or pools, an artificially heated bath is present. Both sections may be integrated to a different degree. The use typology is essential for at least 2 reasons. Firstly, it presents the evolvement of a thermal establishment from a small site to a more extensive spa. This is very significant for understanding thermal sites. Namely, they were rarely founded as a one-time venture, and the level of their complexity was strongly related to the interest of the bathers. In practice, this means that one can expect several building periods that can be more or less distinguishable in the archaeological record. Furthermore, rebuilding a spa in later periods may have eradicated or severely damaged the remains of its earlier stages of development. As a result, the lack of earlier archaeological material or its small quantity does not necessarily mean that the site was not used for therapeutic purposes earlier than the date of available finds. Knowing this, one should be cautious when it comes to the interpretation of a particular site. Secondly, the various degrees of sophistication of thermal establishments raise the question of the reasons behind those differences. One of the possibilities is that each site catered for different categories of visitors, which naturally poses the question of who they were. In order to make such conclusions, multiple factors need to be taken into consideration. For example, the position of the site in the Roman road system of the area, the proximity to other sites, etc. The expenses related to the operation of a larger establishment with a mineral water pool and an artificially heated one were significantly higher than in the case of a small open-air structure. This would suggest that it catered for a larger audience, so visitors possibly came not only from the closest vicinity of the site, but also from the entire region, province, or even further. The place of origin of the patients can be determined on the basis of small finds. In some cases, for example, coins or epigraphic evidence, if available. On the other hand, a small site with few architectural remains can point to the relatively limited geographical scope it had. A thermal establishment with local significance is no less important than the grand and sumptuous spas. They give an exclusive insight into the life and beliefs of a part of the population which is strongly underrepresented in epigraphic and written sources. Remains of religious worship in or around the springs are also an essential piece of this puzzle. They may be temples or enclosures dedicated to the healing deities, most often of Asclepius and Hygieia. However, there are also other gods who were worshipped throughout the Roman Empire. For example, in Aquae Sulis, that I mentioned, Bath in Britain today, the main worship deity was Sulis Minerva, a syncretic deity of Minerva with Sulis, a local Celtic goddess worshipped around the springs in the pre-Roman period. On many thermal sites, there is no evidence of temples. In such instances, religious devotions was demonstrated by offering of votives. This practice is customary to many cultures across the globe, and the Mediterranean is no exception. The form of the ex-votos varied across the empire and different time periods. Votives started to emerge in Italy, in healing settlements, in large numbers for the period 4th, 1st century BC. They could represent the deity, the suppliant, and religious personnel, or a more specific subject related to the particular area, body parts, animals, or fruit. In other words, the votives could refer to the religious practice or to the particular help requested. The common type of ex-votos that has been associated with healing is those in the shape of anatomical parts and organs of humans and rarely animals. Such finds are attested on many sites in central Italy, and not only here. We can see body parts from the Asclepieion in Corinth. Many of them are situated near water. Many of the sites in Italy that I mentioned earlier are situated near water and springs, also streams and pools, but not all of them. And this is very important to underline. Large number of anatomical votives is known from also the Asclepieion in Greece, in Epidaurus and Corinth, though they emerged later than in Italy. Though meter water was not used in the Greek Asclepieion. Anatomical ex-votos are primarily made of terracotta, though there is a few examples of metal and ceramic objects. For years, the predominance of terracotta votives was attributed to the relatively low price of the material. Furthermore, the larger volume of finds has led to the conclusion that terracotta votives were widely available even to the poorer rural population. However, of recently, this view has been contested, since terracotta was actually not that cheap in antiquity. It is suggested that there was a cheaper alternative, ex-votos made from organic materials, which are not preserved to this day. This would mean an even more considerable extent of the cult, which is simply invisible to us. Up until now, there is no anatomical votives discovered in Thrace, so it would seem that this was not practiced. Another common find are votive inscriptions, thanking the gods for being cured. They provide information about the healed individual, as well as, in some cases, a detailed description of the disease. Sometimes the texts also inform us whether the person was local or traveled from afar to use a mineral spring. This is extremely valuable for estimating the range of popularity of a given thermal establishment. Probably the most numerous gifts thrown to the springs are coins. They are essential and quite often provide the only possibility to define the time when a particular site was in use. The number of recovered pieces varies greatly depending on the site. The largest coin assemblage from a Thracian site is the one from Aquae Callida. Around 3,500 or 4,000 coins were discovered during the cleaning of the spring head in 1910. Only 2,917 of them made it to the National Museum because there was no archaeological supervision on the site. And this is a common misconception that Philip was there. No, he was not there. He received information later. In 1994, the spring's discharge became extremely low, so the spring was cleaned again, and further more than 300 coins were uncovered. The coins stretched from the early 5th century BC to late antiquity, and some pieces from the Byzantine period. Coins, though in small numbers, are found on almost all thermal sites in Thrace, including Germanea, Belcinvania, and Pautalia, and many others. In some instances, however, the coins were damaged and illegible as a result of the reaction between water and metal. And here on this photo, you can see that the coins are in different, not all of them are as well preserved. These are only the few of the types of votives that can be discovered in proximity to mineral springs. The finds from Thrace are also of enormous variety. Apart from the coins, the spring at Aqua Calida yielded also votive tablets devoted to the three nymphs. In Pautalia, a large amount of iron knives were found, together with some coins and votive tablets dedicated this time to Asclepius and Hygia, with only a few dedicated to the nymphs and other deities. Here we have one example of a tablet with Asclepius, Hygia, and Telesphorus. And on many sites, the votive tablets are predominantly of the nymphs. Here is one very famous example from Aqua Calida. They are, as you can see, inscribed, and the inscription is of extreme importance because in some cases it also contains the name of the person who was healed. So we can also make we can make assumptions about his origins and so on. Talking about thermal spiles in Thrace, this is a map. I'm sorry for the quality, however, I'm constantly finding new sites, so I keep it to this somewhat basic shape for now. And these are confirmed thermal sites in Thrace. That means that there is remains of cultic activity and mineral water, as I said in the beginning. There is a large number of sites where we don't know, about which there is no certain information. That means that, for example, they were excavated very long time ago in the beginning of the 20th century or in the late 19th century. And a bath was reported, however, there is no precise information about the finds or anything that is reliable. In some cases, for example, I have met with it was written in many places that this site was used by the Romans to heal their horses. And when I went to the site, and of course I heard the story again, I was like, but how do you know this? And the guy and the person who was there told me that, oh, you know, my grandmother said that, and she said that her grandmother said the same. Archaeological evidence did not find any bath on the site. And even though it is probable that horses could be healed with mineral water, this was practiced not only about horses, but about other animals and cattle especially. Then again, it is difficult to be for sure without having the evidence, the precise evidence. And in the next part of the presentation, I will present some thermal sites from Roman Thrace. They were chosen to illustrate, compare, and contrast particular aspects of thermalism in Thrace, and this is not by any means an exhaustive list. And first of all, I would like to start with Skaptopara. It seemed like an excellent place to start. The inscription from Skaptopara, which you can see, dated to 238 AD, is undoubtedly one of the vital epigraphic sources for thermal Thrace. It mentions the hot springs in the vicinity of the village, which are specifically pointed out as one of the advantages of the settlement, an attraction that lured visitors to Skaptopara. Furthermore, it is said explicitly that the springs were used for bathing, not only for pleasure, but also for healing purposes. And this is extremely important to have this information that was used for healing. Nevertheless, the information from the inscription has any grounding in the archaeological evidence. No archaeological excavations were conducted around the springs. However, a new catchment installation was built in 1940. Geological research conducted at the time discovered the presence of numerous, over 30 interconnected springs with medium to low flow rate. Only one of them, spring number 25, yielded ancient remains of a primitive Roman catchment. It was built from Roman bricks, which was naturally clogged up by the sand and silt. Furthermore, coins dating from the 2nd century BC and from the 1st to the 3rd century AD and Ottoman coins of Abdulmecit, that is the mid-19th century, were recovered. The remains of a catchment without a bath give the impression of only rudimentary use of the springs, without any special conveniences. This also shows that supplying any infrastructure was not amongst the priorities of the village population, or simply was not necessary, probably because of the limited number of bathers. So we may conclude that this was a site of local importance that catered to the people of Skaptopara and visitors of the village and the fair. Another aspect I would like to point out is the administrative status of Skaptopara. It is a village, not a city or a town. This is another example of variation in thermal sites. Apart from the spas with interregional importance, there were also smaller ones which catered to the locals and the visitors from the region or those traveling by. It is also crucial to determine at what period the mineral springs were used. Coin finds imply a use from the 2nd century BC and in the Roman period, which intensified after the 1st century. This will coincide with the existence of the fair, which according to numismatic evidence was established probably around the 4th century BC and existed through to the 19th century. However, it should be noted that the author of the report of the Geological Survey informs that the discovered coins were shown to the archaeologist in the National Museum who supplied the dating. So this means that this date is pretty accurate. As a result, we have, however, the finds were not published in the Bulletin of the Archaeological Association, and as a result, we have no precise information about the number of recovered coins and their precise attribution, which could shed light on the intensity of use in different periods. In order to show the contrast, we now move to Pautalia, one of the important cities and a large urban center in Thrace, which was situated near mineral springs, one of the hottest in Thrace with present temperature of 75 degrees. Asclepius was a very important deity for Pautalia, as can be concluded from its presence on coins and numerous inscriptions. Furthermore, a dedication to the Pautalian Asclepius, Hygieia, and Telesphorus was found in Epidauros, which proves that the site was famous beyond Thrace. The area around the springs falls outside of the ancient city walls. Here, one on this plan, and was excavated in the beginning of the 20th century by Iordan Ivanov. He discovered a temple on the foot of the hill, which he attributed to Asclepius, based on the fragment of floor mosaic representing a snake, that's it, the sacred animal of the god. This is the mosaic in question. This interpretation was contested by Teofil Ivanov in 1960, who instead identified the animal as a dolphin. The style of the mosaic dates to the 2nd century. Some 20 meters down the hill, near the place of the modern catchment, a bath was discovered. According to Teofil Ivanov, it probably had a colonnade, however, its full plan is unknown. From the area around the spring, numerous marble votive plaques representing Asclepius, Hygieia, and Telesphorus were found, along with such representing the nymphs and other deities. The tablets are dated mainly to the 2nd, 3rd century. Furthermore, a lot of small finds like fibula, knives, keys, dated to the 2nd, 4th century were found. A large number of coins were found, however, they were badly corroded, which made them impossible to study. Two baths were discovered also inside the city walls. A large thermal complex that covered 2 insula and the area of about 3,000 square meters, here number 4. And so the so-called small therme, which covered only 1 insula, and this is number 7. Both used mineral water. The large thermae were probably built in the beginning of the 2nd century and used up until the 4th century, though they are secular in nature and probably served civil and hygienic purposes, as city thermae usually did. However, some votive plaques were recovered, which may indicate that healing also took place there, albeit to a very, very limited extent. The so-called small thermae were located close to the city center. Unfortunately, I have not been able to locate a plan of the remains to show you. The building was built around the late 2nd, early 3rd century AD and was out of use by the 6th century. Its location and the richly decorated marble floors and walls prove that it was an important one in the city. The bed had a complicated plan, and it is assumed it had separate sections for women and men. In one of the rooms, several small bathtubs were found, which were most probably used for healing purposes. Bathtubs are widely used also in modern balneology because they allow to better control the temperature of the water. Furthermore, they can be made use of to isolate people with skin conditions, for example, or such suffering from contagious diseases, and to separate them from other bathers. As a matter of fact, the waters of Potalia, now Kyustendil, are known for their positive effect on skin diseases. So it would seem that healing took place not only in the area around the springs, but also in Potalia itself. This points to a significant interest in the mineral waters. Furthermore, the presence of bathtubs at the small thermae suggests a richer offer of therapeutic services. The thermae were undoubtedly secondary to the bath by the springs, so they may have been an answer to an increased interest in the site and in healing by the springs. Here, what is important is also that the sacred bath, or number 1, is outside of the city walls, and this is quite often seen in Greek Asclepiae, where there are sacred sites outside of a city, usually, or sometimes within the city also, but separated very well by it. And in Thrace, this is a very, very interesting example. So now moving to the conclusion, what I would like you to remember from today's talk is the first thing that when we speak about thermalism, we mean mineral water and relationship with religion. And this is what separates it from normal bathing for hygienic purposes, let's say, and everyday bathing that took place. The second thing is that there were different types of sites in terms of scope and also in terms of evidence. The wide range of sites catered to different people in different regions and also of different material status, as we can probably imagine. But in order to have such a network of sites, we need to have this understanding that mineral water is good for health. So this was probably an understanding that was already widespread in Thrace before, in order for this network to appear. And the third thing is that evidence versus reality. As I spoke and underlined a couple of times here, votive gifts or remains of the cultic activity around the springs is extremely important to define a site as a thermal site. However, those ex votos do not necessarily survive to our times in the same form that they were put there. That means that quite a lot of it may be missing. So if we don't find them at all, we need to ask the question whether the finds that we indeed find really show the entire, let's say, richness and the entire scope of this healing method. And thank you for your attention. I'll be very grateful for any comments you might have.